Sexual and reproductive rights are relatively new rights. They emerged in the 1990s and in fact were actually the outcome of much lobbying by women's movements and also movements within the UN itself. While reproductive rights have enjoyed some level of universal acceptance, sexual rights are still highly contested and not agreed by all. However, the ability to live reproductive rights is an ongoing battle. Some of the battles have only been won relatively recently in Western countries. If we look to the 1960s in the USA, for example, well, buying contraception was not allowed. It was prohibited, even among married couples. This was until a Supreme Court ruling that such prohibitions were not legal. What it suggested was that if you read between the lines of the Constitution, there was a sacred right to privacy, and these laws broke that right to privacy. Only in the 1970s could unmarried couples buy contraception, and later on in the 70s this went on to allow people of a lower age group to actually access contraception. So this is extremely important that women are able to separate sexuality and a healthy and satisfying sex life from childbirth. And this is what we're talking about when we're talking about reproductive rights. At the international level, reproductive rights became enshrined as rights through the Cairo Consensus that came out of the International Conference on Population and Development in 1994. We have to bear in mind this was a negotiated agreement. Anything that is negotiated among 180 different states is not going to satisfy everyone, particularly the women's movement. However, it is an advancement and it does focus on reproductive rights and reproductive health. An element that's really stressed within there is autonomy. And autonomy is key for any woman to exercise her reproductive rights. She must have the ability to make decisions over her own body. Now, autonomy is very difficult to achieve through legislation. Autonomy is about social norms. Autonomy is about intimate relations. Autonomy is about changing opinions. So autonomy is central, but the extent to which we can actually achieve autonomy via legal aspects or via international frameworks is very much open to question and demands a very different approach. When we look how reproductive rights are being talked about in the conferences and conventions, what we see is a complete physical and mental health approach. But also within this is the idea of a safe and satisfying sex life. The ability to reproduce if you want to, but also the ability to not reproduce. So when we talk about reproductive rights, they're often separated out from sexual rights, but it's very difficult to do that because the two go together. The problem is that sexual rights are contested and reproductive rights are less contested. And reproductive health is less contested again. So the idea is trying to couple reproductive rights with existing rights. So if we look at economic and social rights, we can see that reproductive rights would fit in there. If we look at civil and political rights, the right to life, to liberty, we can see that reproductive rights can fit within there. What we tend to see is then sexual rights collapsed into reproductive rights collapsed into reproductive health. And this means that many women's movements will use the notion of reproductive health to advance their claims because it is less problematic than using other terms. It suggests a claim can be made and that someone should respond to that claim, obligation and duty. Hence why these rights are contested. On the other hand, of course, the rights exist, but do they actually mean anything to men and women? So in my own research, when we asked women, do women have the right to make decisions over their own bodies, 96% of women said yes. When we asked them if women should always have sex with men if the man wants to, a quarter said yes. More importantly, when we asked men, should women have the right to decide over their own bodies, a third of the men said no. When we look at statistics like that, we have to question whether reproductive rights, as they exist in international and national laws, mean anything for men and women, and particularly whether they can be and are a lived reality for women.